Thank you, Irene, and good morning to over 200 members of the Institute who have joined us for this very essential and timely issue as we talk about matters inclusivity. Allow me, first of all, to thank Site Savers for giving us the opportunity as HR professionals to ensure that we walk the talk. And the reason is clearly written, the professional body of HR practitioners in Kenya. I will switch off my video at this point, but I hope now you've all seen so that you know that it's not a robot speaking to you. So the reason why we've organized this is that as HR practitioners, we have a very critical role when it comes to matters inclusivity. And it's key that even as we navigate through this, there's been a lot of talks around here. There've been a lot of policy drives. We have both at the government and also at developmental. Many individuals, institutions are putting a lot of effort so that matters inclusivity, especially people with disability, are part and parcel of the workforce and within our communities. So why are we having these sessions today? Eric and Regina will take us through that. But before I even invite them, I wanted us to go in with a mindset of this is enshrined in the Constitution of Kenya, which is close to more than just a little over 12 years now. In Article 54 of the Constitution, the rights of people with disability is outlined. There is even a directive to the government that 5% of all public offices should consider for people with disability. But you know what happens when something is anchored in the Constitution? It's our responsibility as policy drivers that the same is cascaded to our different institutions. So as we develop those HR metrics, are we measuring how we are doing with people with disability? And that starts from the entry. How are we advertising? How are our buildings? How are our boards? Are we still just focusing on the gender, or the people with disabilities also considered? Have we limited ourselves to just the 5%, which, by the way, nationally, that has not yet even been achieved. It's less than 3%, even within the government setup. So how do we bridge that gap as HR professionals? And today, we have with us team from Site Savers who will support us as HR professionals. They have different tools, by the way. You will benefit after this call on how you can actually go and ensure the same is implemented in your different organization. And as an institute, and we will work with you in this journey, we have partnered with Site Savers. Any resources you need, any information you require, as you enable your workplaces, as you work on your policies to be inclusive, we will be here and we will walk that journey together. Now, I would like to hand it back to Irene so that she can invite our guests and our spotlights for today as they take us through this journey. They have lived the experience, they have developed the policies, and they will guide us as HR professionals. What is our role and how can we support this timely and very noble idea that our workplaces should be inclusive for people with disability. Thank you so much, Irene. Back to you.
Thank you, Madam Kuresha. We appreciate your leadership and insights on this. Without further ado, allow me to introduce briefly our speakers before they take the floor. We will be hearing from Regina Mwangi, who works at Site Savers Kenya as a program officer for the Future Makers program. She is a disability rights champion in Kenya with 6 years of experience in promoting the inclusions of persons with disability through the management and implementation of different programs. She has been part and parcel of different platforms that promote inclusion of persons with disability, including the Global Disability Summit and the United Nations Conference of State Parties. We are privileged to have two speakers. So that is Regina. I'm sure she can build on what I have left out. We also have Engineer Eric Ngodi, HSC. He is a disability rights champion and public servant. He is a board member at United Disabled Persons of Kenya, UDPK, an umbrella body of organizations of persons with disabilities established in 1989, and is mandated to champion meaningful participation of persons with disability in all spheres of life in terms of advocacy, awareness, and sensitization of PWD issues. He has a rich background cutting across environmental engineering and is a certified professional in accessibility core competencies. I'm sure, engineer, you will let us know what that means. He's also awarded by the president the head of state commendation for his contribution to our society. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged to have Regina and Eric speak to us this morning. And we encourage you to share your questions with us on the Q&A section and to pay attention so that we can all learn together. So Regina and Eric, the floor is yours. Karibuni.
Thank you so much, Irene. Thank you so much for the invite, Madam Kuresha, and the entire leadership of the Institute of Human Resource Management. We are so delighted to be here today to deliver this training session to the IHRM members. As you've heard, my name is Regina Mwangi. I currently work at Site Savers as a program officer for the Future Makers program. Now, Site Savers is an international organization that works in over 30 countries, mostly focusing in Africa and even parts of Asia, where we implement programs around disability inclusion and promoting eye health. So our work on disability inclusion is very key because we want to ensure that we promote the economic empowerment of persons with disability. And the way we do that is by working with employers and also skills training for persons with disability so that they have the skills that the HR, are looking for. And in turn, we do also work with company because we know disability is an issue that for a long time has not had the enough attention or highlight that it needs to. One, because HR, managers normally tell us, oh, we don't know how to include persons with disability. So our mandate is to build the confidence of employers to be able to employ persons with disability, to be able to ensure accessibility of their platforms, of their workplaces, the physical built environment, so that you're able to bring on disability talent in your respective organizations. Before I go further, I'm going to deliver the training to you in partnership with my colleague, Eric. Eric, would you want to say hi before we begin?
No.
Hello, yes, Eric, please go ahead.
Hi, Regina, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Just say hello to the members and then we can begin.
Thank you, Regina, and thank you, team. Glad to be here. My name is Eric Ngondi. I work with NEMA, and I also deliver this on behalf of the United Disabled Persons of Kenya, UDPK, which is an umbrella body of organizations of persons with disability. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. Allow me now to share my slides so that we can begin. Irene, if you could confirm if my slides are visible.
Yes, they are.
Good, great, thank you. So we are beginning a journey today with you members of IHRM towards disability inclusion. And the reason why I say it's a journey, because disability inclusion is not just a one-off thing. It's a process that, we have to begin somewhere. And today we are taking the first step. Let me move to the next slide. I think there's something wrong. Let me stop sharing and share again. Sorry for that. In the meantime, you can be letting us know on the chat box, what are you looking forward to learn? What are your expectations? What specific thing would you want to learn about disability inclusion? Or what are the challenges that you've had as a HR professional when it comes to disability inclusion? Irene, if you could help to monitor the chats, what responses we will be getting. Now, our objective for today's training is to build a disability inclusion awareness to you members. We shall look at various issues. How do we define and understand disability? We shall look at the language bit of it, and now we shall look at even the employment process, because that's your everyday experience. What are the things that you need to consider? And also we shall also be looking forward to hear from you. But the objective, we want to just build awareness around disability inclusion. We have a few questions that I would like for you to be pondering about, and perhaps towards the end, we can get to hear from you. What are your responses? The first question is, what are the challenges to disability inclusion, especially in the context of your respective company where you work? And what do you need to do differently to increase the inclusion of persons with disability? And just to mention, if you're interested for Site Savers to walk with you, the journey of disability inclusion, we'll be sharing our contacts and our email addresses, but you can also share your contacts in the chat box, and we will be able to do a follow-up with you so that we can have a meeting and get to know what specific areas could you require our support. I did, request you to share what are your expectations so that we have them in mind as we deliver these training sessions. If I could just look at the chat, we have Stanley Wilunda saying, I'm keen to know the common metrics used to measure success of an inclusion program. Wonderful, Stanley. We'll be able to look at that. This Joe says, would kindly like to know more about your promotion on eye health through Site Savers. Big percentage of workforce begin to experience eye issues after 40. Great, we can talk about that. Then what are the key issues to be considered when developing a policy which entails disability inclusion? So we shall look at that. You know how to headhunt, as in, are there specific websites where we can share our vacancies? Great, great. I'm loving the expectation around here. So we shall be able to cover all those areas. And if you feel that at the end of the day, we haven't covered that area, just feel free to write to us. Just to begin, let's start by understanding what do we mean by inclusion. So if you can see my screen, I have some squares on the left side, hand side, squares labeled A, B, C, and D. Then we have some words on the right hand side. The words are segregation, exclusion, inclusion, and integration. So what I want us to do is a simple activity that most of us used to do while we were in kindergarten, is matching the words in the picture. So we want us to match the right word represents which picture. And the pictures, just to describe them, picture A, we have a circle, one large circle. Inside the circle, we can see persons without disability, and outside the circle, we can see persons with disability are outside that circumference. On picture B, we have two circles, one large one with persons with disability, persons without disability drawn in it, and on the side we have a smaller circle where persons with disability are drawn in it. Image C, we have one big circle with persons without disability drawn within, and inside that circle there's another small circle that has persons with disability inside it. And on image D, we have one large circle where we have both persons with and without disability. So my question is very simple. So looking at the words and the pictures, which word goes where? I'd like to hear your responses and tell us again why. Why? Why would you say A is inclusion and not C or D? Let me see the responses. Clara Selim says C for inclusion. Why do you say C is inclusion? Winfred Nguku says D is inclusion. Interesting. D is equals to inclusion. Someone else, interesting. Why do you think D is integration? Susan Campbell. Flora, D inclusion. Why isn't someone talking about, okay, someone talks about A exclusion, D is, okay, picture B symbolizes exclusion, A exclusion. Okay, great to hear that, guy, but nobody is giving me a reason. So in the interest of time, let's go through it. So A represents exclusion, and you can see clearly. So for those who are saying A is exclusion, you're right. And that's because you can see persons with disability are not included. They're not part of the mainstream society. The society, you can see it's only the society now, being represented by the circle, has only persons without disability. And you can see persons with disability exist outside there. So the society is not inclusive, is not considerate of their needs, especially when it comes to reasonable accommodation, so that they are able to coexist with the other members of the society. Image B represents segregation, and you can see that persons with disability are included but separately. Now, how would this now relate to today's society? For image B, segregation, we might say that, this particular company, does not hire persons with disability. Persons with disability, perhaps, they are built for work shelters separately, and there are jobs that are considered that they can be able to do. So they are still limited. There's no that inclusion. There's no that sense of belonging into the mainstream society. Image C is interesting because some of you are saying it's inclusion, again, it's integration, but C represents integration. You can see they're still part of they're part of the mainstream society currently, but you can see it's only a certain level of their needs are being considered. The society is not fully inclusive, only parts of it. So they're still, it's like you're with us, but you're not really part of us. So let's say it's in terms of the workplace, you might say, our organization, the company where we work in, persons with disability cannot be able to access, let's say the first, second, or third floor. So what do you decide? All persons with disability in this company will be working on the ground floor. Or you say, our employees with deafness, we don't have a sign language interpreter who can be able to support each employees. So we'll have sign language interpreter, and all deaf workers need to work in this place where there's a sign language interpreter. But image D, you can actually see that everyone exists in the same society. Persons with disability are in the same society, so their needs are considered, they are being included when it comes to employment, economic opportunities. There's that access, so there's no denial on the basis of disability. And as I mentioned, inclusion is a journey, and we are just beginning the first step. I'm seeing there's a lot of feedback coming in the chat box. Martha, Ndururi says, at what point should a person with disability declare their status? Interesting. We shall look at all that. My colleague will be coming in to talk about disability. Let's quickly look at the statistics. I know most of you perhaps know this, that 1 in every 7 people have a disability globally. 15% of the world's population live with a disability. Currently, we are at what, 8 billion. So you can imagine 15% of that is made up of persons with disability. Unfortunately, 80% of that of persons with disability, they live in developing countries. So in Africa, parts of Asia, Caribbean, then 70 to 80% of persons with disability are unemployed, and there are reasons to that. And that's why we are trying to work around reducing that number. Looking quickly at the legal provisions, the ED, CHRP, Kresha did talk about the legal provisions that we all need to be compliant to. Specifically, when it comes to disability, we do have in Kenya, the Act of 2003. That talks about the rights of persons with disability and prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. We have the 2010 Constitution, Article 54 is very clear on disability inclusion. We have the Disability Bill of 2019, again, that prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. Internationally, we have the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability that again has Article 28 that talks about work and employment and their provisions. And I know even as HR professionals, also we have the Employment Act that also prohibits strongly against discriminating someone on the basis of their disability. I'll now invite my colleague, Eric, just to take us through this session of defining disabilities, so that at least from the understanding we are going to get today, moving on forward, at least our understanding, perhaps we are going to challenge some of the perceptions we have about persons with disability and perhaps gain new perspective moving on forward. So Eric, kindly, if you can hear me. Eric, are you there? My colleague Eric seems to have dropped off. Let me just continue, but in the meantime, let me look at the charts. So Winfred is asking for purposes of disability inclusion at the workplace. Are we considering physical disability only? No, Winfred, we are considering all disabilities. Now, I would want us to look at the screen. On the screen, so there we can see someone using a wheelchair at the bottom of a flight of stairs. You can see the person has an inverted smile, so you can see the person is angry if you are to read the facial expression. And looking at it, this is someone perhaps who was on their daily business. This could actually be someone who wants to apply for a job opportunity at your company, any company. And the person has applied for a job there. The person has actually been invited for an interview. And when coming to do the interview, the wheelchair user, let's give him a name, let's call him Juma. When Juma comes to do the interview, he's met with a flight of staircase. And you can imagine emotionally how that might be a burden to him, and that's why he's perhaps not happy. He has missed an opportunity to interview for a job, perhaps that he's qualified for. Now, just thinking for a moment about this picture, this picture speaks, a thousand words. So when it comes to disability, you can see that Mr. Juma has applied for the job. He actually came to the point of going in for the interview, but now the stairs hindered him from going in for the interview. And what does this tell us? That disability is not actually the impairment. So when we speak about disability, there is impairment and barriers. Impairment is, let's say, the loss of a body functioning. It's the loss of a body functioning, let's say the hand, the leg, or the eye, or the ears. You've lost that functioning because of perhaps medical reasons, or just something happened to you. Eric, can you hear me? Eric, are you there? Okay. So now that is the impairment. Like, for instance, I would just want to disclose that myself, I have a disability. I'm a wheelchair user. I'm trying to lean in the camera to see if you can see my wheelchair, but I don't think you can see it. I'm seated actually currently on my wheelchair. So the impairment is my lower limbs. Eric, kindly just mute. Irene, kindly support in muting Eric. So that is the impairment, the loss of functioning on the lower limbs. But that doesn't mean that I am disabled.
Yeah.
That's the loss of that functioning is not what entails disability. Disability comes in as a result of the barriers. So if I didn't have a wheelchair, which is a device that helps me to move around and do my job actually, then that's what disables me, the physical barriers. Now, I want to introduce us to this concept. If you can see on the screen, it's that the impairment, when you combine it with the barrier, now that's what brings out disability. And let me just mention it. Maybe another example for someone who is deaf. So the impairment is that the hearing functioning, the functioning of the ears is what has been affected. But that someone can communicate through sign language. We've seen, they end up doing amazing things. But now, if we didn't have, let's say, someone with an impairment, a hearing impairment, applies for a job opportunity somewhere, they show up for the interview, and there it's when they get to learn there's no sign language interpreter to interpret for them. And that is the communication barrier. It means the person will not be able to participate in that interview, to partake that interview, because there's no provision of the communication. So the provision of reasonable accommodation is what I'm talking about, whether it's a sign language interpreter, having accessible venues, the physical environment, and all that. So this impairment in itself does not cause disability. It is the impairment and now the barriers that are in our society. If you look at the physical built environment, our transport system, it's not physically accessible to many people. The issue of the people with hearing impairment, access to sign language interpretation, there's no that awareness or knowledge that even companies and organizations needs to have a sign language interpreter, because you might have clients with hearing impairment that want to come to your company and perhaps get your products, your services, but because there's not that provision, they will not come. So even as we're talking about disability, let's think of persons with disability as both clients and even talents that we can bring on board. So that's what leads to disability, the barriers in the society, and we'll talk about barriers in a moment. But now when we eliminate the barriers, so that persons with disability are able to participate fully in the society, we'll have the impairment, the loss of that particular functioning that I mentioned. If you have that impairment, but now the society is accessible, the environment is accessible, we'll have what we call inclusion. And inclusion is our business, and inclusion is what we are preaching today, so that our organizations, institutions, even our homes, the way we build them, become accessible for everyone, because again, we normally say that there's nothing for us without us. Let's talk about barriers for a moment. Eric, are you there? Okay. So I've mentioned about physical barriers or environmental barriers, and these are barriers
Regina?
that. Yes, Eric, can you
Sorry,
hear me?
I'm having a
Eric,
serious net.
it's
Can
okay.
you?
It's okay. It's okay. Let me go
Okay.
ahead. Yeah, it's okay. So when you're talking about physical environment, we're looking at the built environment, the way our infrastructure is built and designed. Is it accessible for persons with disability, physical disability, or any disability, even visual disability? In many organizations today, when you go, you'll find that there are either stairs, there's no lift, there are no ramps to access several of them, but so many upcoming buildings are accessible. You can see there's a lift, there are ramps, and even the culture of the organization is welcoming. The other barrier that persons with disability do face a lot, persons with impairment, now that we're talking about the barriers, is attitudinal barriers. And these are the preconceived notions, attitudes, and perceptions towards persons with disability. We would think that persons with disability, perhaps they're not talented enough, they're not capable. They should only be subjects or objects of pity, charity. They cannot be, we don't see as full human beings who are capable to participate and contribute to development and to our society as compared to someone without a disability. So the notions that we hold about persons with disability. So if you see someone with a disability today, you are reviewing CVs and you see someone has disclosed that, oh, and I have a disability. What comes into your mind? What do you think about? What is your first instinct? So today we are trying just to relearn some of the things that we think are right. The other barrier is around institutional and organization barrier. And this looks at the even policy structures, the standards and procedures. Are they discriminative around for persons with disability, or do they even promote inclusion? Do we have, let's say, a policy in HR that we say each time we advertise a role, let's aim to at least have pre-served slots for persons with disability? Or are you like the work we do in this organization, persons with disability are not allowed to do it, or we don't think they can be able to do it? The other barrier is around information and communication. And this is mostly felt, especially for people with hearing impairment, for people with visual impairment. I've talked about that. A few of us, if you know how to speak in Kenyan Sign Language, please post in the chat box. I wonder how many of us know who have friends who have hearing impairment or can communicate comfortably in the Kenya Sign Language, or even for the people with visual impairment. If hired, these people do an amazing job. They're productive as anyone else. But if we give them, let's say, a laptop and the laptop has no screen readers, they will not be able to deliver in the work. And that is not because they themselves cannot deliver, is that they have not received the reasonable accommodation support to be able now to deliver. So this helped us, talking about this barrier, just helped us to look at our workplace, our processes, our systems, the way the environment is built around our workplace, and to really think, what do we need to do different so that we promote inclusion? And I hope this is at least bringing some ideas in your mind. And the good thing is that we work with companies just to ensure that we conduct an accessibility assessment around the environment, just to ensure that we tell you where you are at and then help you to do the necessary adjustments. I've talked a lot about reasonable accommodation, and perhaps this is a new term to some of us, but reasonable accommodation basically refers to the necessary and appropriate modification and adjustments to ensure that persons with disability have the full enjoyment or just a moment. Reasonable accommodation refers to necessary and appropriate modification and adjustments to ensure persons with disability the enjoyment or the exercise on an equal basis with others of all human rights, so that to ensure that everyone has an opportunity, whether they have a disability or not, to participate with the others. For example, at workplace, if you have a training, let's say you have a workshop, let's say you have a retreat, the organization start to think we shall be doing this and this activity, and are these activities inclusive of our colleagues who have different types of disability, or this job, we have someone with a disability who has applied for this opportunity. The person has said, I have a visual impairment. What can we do to support this person to be able to deliver? Oh, we need to think about getting screen reader for this individual. Or we need to think about our physical built environment and ensure that this person is able to access the workplace together, just like any other person without a disability. And reasonable accommodation, just to mention that it doesn't have to be expensive. It should not be seen to impose a disproportionate or undue burden to the employer. And most of these issues around reasonable accommodation, if you work with the candidate who has applied for an opportunity, they would be able to tell you, to give you ideas of how to support their inclusion needs. So I wouldn't want us to think that this is an expensive endeavor to undertake. So we've talked about reasonable accommodation, which is one of the ways to now eliminate the barriers. I talked about inclusion is about eliminating the barriers. There's another way, and this is called the universal design. And the universal design basically refers to designing products, services in a way that all people are able to use it, whether you have a disability or not. So for example, if it's a built environment, it is designed in a way that everyone can use it. It's interesting that sometimes I see entryways into buildings and organizations, there's a ramp on the side and then there are staircase on the side. And it's not only persons with disability who use that ramp. Everyone uses it because perhaps you're scared of falling in the staircase, or perhaps you just want to walk, easily through the ramp. So universal design is ensuring that whatever it is you have designed or built, anyone in the world cannot be able to use it, not just a specific group. So, and now if we are able to remove all the barriers in the society through reasonable accommodation, through the universal design, we'll be building what we call an accessible environment. You saw the picture of Juma on top there. Juma was angry, Juma felt sad, but you can see now that on this picture, there's a ramp here. The person is able to, wheel through if they are wheelchair users, and that makes them happy. Quickly, let's look at language etiquette. I know there will be some questions. Let me just look through the chat. Nicholas says this is educative. I think HRMBPB should consider designing a curriculum in what Kenya Basic Sign Language is. Yeah, because we need to know sign language. You can imagine all the opportunities we lose by not having friendships with people who are deaf. Thank you. I've always been so curious to learn sign language. Thank you. Where can one learn sign language? I've seen you have shared places where one could learn sign language. Okay, thank you so much. The chat is actually on fire. So many guys just sharing opportunities and connections. So on language etiquette around disability. So I mentioned today that we are challenging perceptions and attitudes that we have always had. And just to reiterate that words have power. So the language that we use when referring or talking to persons with disability can either build or break them. So we need to be very careful. And why are we championing disability appropriate language? It's because we know there is a language that is not appropriate. And if we continue using that, first of all, we need to recognize that people with disability are a largest minority group, and it's inclusive of all dimensions. If you think about it, any persons with disability could be anyone at any age, any gender. We have men and women. They come from all religions, ethnicities, sexual orientations, economic levels. You know, when it comes to poverty, we have even persons with disability. We have who are poor, ethnicities. We cannot just say it's only this tribe that has people with disability, so the other tribes are okay. And we cannot say only this particular religion has persons with disability. And that's why the disability community is the largest minority group. The reason why we use appropriate language is so that we can be able to shape attitudes and perceptions that are acceptable and that are empowering and encouraging, to avoid, again, perpetuating old stereotypes. We want to break the bad habits, and we also want to model appropriate language that is empowering, and language that at least is dignifying and respectful to persons with disability. So in disability, there's a concept we call the person first language. The person first, perhaps some of you are familiar with this, and this means putting the person before the disability and describe what the person has, not who the person is. So I did mention earlier that I have a physical disability. I'm a wheelchair user. So the inappropriate term that most of, that you would see even in literature or people say is, she's confined to a wheelchair. But if you look at it, I'm not glued to my wheelchair. So am I really confined? I can, get out of my wheelchair anytime I want. I can, get into a car and all that. So instead of saying she's confined to a wheelchair, we're supposed to say she uses a wheelchair. She's a wheelchair user. I know we have people with autism, and we have the temptation to call them autistic. We are just supposed to say that the person has autism. And again, when it comes to language, I would encourage us to know that this is very much individual basis. It's based on individual preferences. Perhaps there's someone with autism who is okay being, described as he's autistic, and there's someone else who would be offended by that. So the right thing is always to ask the individual, what would they prefer? And if you've not had the conversation, because you need to build rapport before you get to that level, just call the person the name, John, Simon, Peter, Regina, Irene. Just refer to the name, because you do not have to refer to the person by their condition. So even persons with disability, there is the temptation to say the disabled, but it's people with disability or a person with disability. You have those ones, the inappropriate language, would say he's retarded, but in essence, this person just has an intellectual disability. So before we move further, just to say that there are more examples, like saying cripple, deaf, dumb, calling deaf people dumb. That is not appropriate language. And what we'll do after this session is that, Irene, I'll share with you this slide so that you can share with the members just to see what are the right terminologies to use. So for example, if you're rolling out a job application, you'd say something like, let's say, our company does not discriminate against disability, age, gender, and all that. We don't discriminate against the disabled and all that. So just ensuring perhaps when you're rolling out a job description or a job advert, can you reach to an organization, let's say, for example, like Site Savers, to help you review that particular job description? If there's an element around disability, or how do you make it inclusive so that even persons with disability would actually be attracted to that particular advert and for them to apply on it. Let's now look at the employment process. I know perhaps most of you were waiting for this session. And you will pardon me if I'm very quick. It's in the interest of time. So Zamari is asking, is it possible to record this training? Yes, it's being recorded. There's someone asking, what is the cost of training the committee members? Could wish to train our committee members? Actually, perhaps I didn't mention this when I started, is that Site Savers, we are funded. So we do not charge members or companies or even IHRM to deliver this training or to offer our services and support around disability inclusion. So this comes at no cost. So do not be worried about the cost implication. Let's look at the employment process, right from the advertisement, the application, assessment, onboarding, retention, and even growth. And in each stage, let's look at what are the issues around disability that we need to be cognizant of, and what can we do to ensure that we are inclusive. Now, when it comes to advertisement, I think I did mention a little bit about that. Looking at the advert that you're going to place, whether it's in the newspaper, let's say it's on your website, you need to advertise the job where people with disability can access them. And there are multiple platforms. I've seen someone mentioning about the Fuzu platform. There's a job portal called NCPWDI2I. This is a career portal specifically for persons with disability, and it's built in partnership with Fuzu. That's why you see there's a fuzu.com there. So this particular career portal has persons, job seekers with disability already registered on the platform. There are companies and organizations that place job adverts there. So, and that's why I mentioned, whenever you're rolling out any advert, have you already considered and planned that for this particular position, we would want to also get applicants with disability applying. So you need to be very tactful and even know where to get your application, attract candidates with a disability. Is the content, again, even accessible? So for example, the job description for people who have visual impairment using a screen reader, can these people be able now to read that job description and be able to understand using a screen reader? There are softwares to support with making documents accessible. And nowadays, even most of the Windows, Windows 10, even 11, you can enable accessibility features. There are accessibility checkers. You can just click that button just to see the document that you have just produced, is it accessible? Or you can have someone review the document for you. And again, in the advertisement, I did mention it's very, very important for organization. I see many companies doing it just to ensure that company X does not discriminate against, gender, disability, age. They're usually those categories. Very important, because when a job seeker with disability sees that, they will know that this company is looking for persons with disability, and that will give them the encouragement to apply. When it comes now to the application process, provide accessible application form and information pack. I think I've talked about that. Do you require candidates to apply through a software? Has this software been tested for accessibility? Irene, when she was introducing Eric, there was something accessibility. So there's a way websites, softwares can be tested for accessibility. And nowadays, software developers are able to build accessible products that are accessible to anyone, especially using a screen reader, or there's a way you can enable different accessibility features. So have you had your website checked for accessibility? How has it been tested with persons with disability, just to ensure that it complies to the accessibility standards. I've mentioned about advertising vacancies on accessible websites. Also describe what the selection process looks like. To be very clear, because sometimes I know most of us have this story of you just applied and you never heard from the company, or it was not even clear how the selection process would be. So it's very important to be as transparent as possible and be open as possible. Again, after each job application, if you have built an accessible advertisement and application process, after that process you've done it, are you able to send post-interview surveys to candidates, especially those with disability, for them to be able to provide feedback on how the platform was, what was their experience, and perhaps give, pinpoint areas that you need to improve on. And again, just ensuring that you're testing your processes with persons with disability all the time, just to ensure that everything is working as well. Again, now when you've done the shortlisting, people have applied, you've seen that a few people did mention about they have disability. When you're inviting them, let's say for interview and all that process, do you ask them what are their reasonable accommodation needs? I know there's a temptation to ask someone, what disability do you have? What are we going to do? But the most prudent thing to do is to ask, dear so-and-so, we recently got your application for this job opportunity. You've disclosed that you have a disability and we would want to support you as much as possible. Kindly let us know what are your reasonable accommodation needs. Sharing this as a person with a lived experience of disability, when you apply for job opportunities and they ask you that, you actually feel that this is a company that actually wants to support me to be able to go through this process. And so the person would get back and say, oh, I'm a deaf person, I use Kenya Sign Language, kindly provide me with sign language interpreter during the interview. Or someone might say, oh, I'm a person with a physical disability. I would want my interview to be held in a in an accessible venue, and the people who are doing the interviews or the HR person doing that process would be able to provide that support. So it's usually very prudent. Many job applicants with disability who have done applications, when I talked about the attitudinal barriers, I did mention, when you see a CV or a cover letter and someone says, says they have a disability, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? To lock them out? And you're not locking them out of any maliciousness. It's because you're scared and you don't know how to support. But it's always prudent. Why don't you give the person the shot and ask them what is their reasonable accommodation needs? And then the person would be able to tell you. And actually they'll be able to tell you, oh, I'm a deaf person, but I have a sign language interpreter who would be able to help me. Yeah, let's look at the assessment again. I've mentioned not making assumptions. Let's say there's a person with a visual impairment who applied for that opportunity and you quickly provide the braille machine. Perhaps they don't use it because not everyone who has visual impairment uses uses the braille. There are other assistive technologies they use. Then, of course, hold the assessment in an accessible physical environment, and that would come after you ask for what are the reasonable accommodation needs. Then, in terms of the assessment timing, are you flexible? Are you able to increase the assessment timing where applicable, especially for people with different impairments? They might need flexibility when it comes to time. Again, focus on what the candidate can do. They look at their qualification. By the way, we're not talking about tokenism here. We're not talking about, feeling wishy for the candidates. You've seen this is a person, by the way, looking at the CV, they can deliver, they have the experience, they have the qualifications. What they just need is that reasonable accommodation support. So you will not be saying, now that I've gotten, let's say, 10 CVs from persons with disability, let's consider all of them. Of course, we are using the human rights-based model, and you're not doing charity to this individual. It's about looking at the qualities. What do they have to offer? Because disability is just a tiny part of who they are. When it comes to the onboarding process, do you have accessible induction process? Like, for example, I remember one time, I got the job offer. I knew perhaps the company will not be accessible. You just write an email, ask the person what is the reasonable accommodation. And I said, do you guys have an accessible venue where we could do the induction, or even where we could do the interview? It's always very, very good to ask. And nowadays, with so many people working from home, it has actually become a very good thing for persons with disability, because we don't have to be locked out of opportunity because of lack of accessibility. Do you have inclusive induction platforms? Do you need people to take some training, some modules when they have joined the company? Are those platforms accessible for them? And how can you make them accessible? The employee handbook, does it have areas talking about disability? Is it accessible? Have the line managers who are taking up these people, or the supervisors, do they have the disability etiquette around how to manage an employee with disability? Those are the issues to think about it. Even in terms of flexibility, when this person joins, let's say we say company X, our employees are supposed to be in the office at 7 a.m. Now, because of different reasons, 7 a.m., especially, let's say, for people with different impairments, there's issues to do with medication. Perhaps most of them live far. Can we be flexible that the person can be able to come in, let's say, at 8 or 9 a.m.? And so long as the person gets to deliver, then also involve the employee in determining the reasonable accommodation needs. I did mention not assuming. So if you have any person with disability who have applied to the company, just don't see the person as they have an intellectual disability, and then you think intellectual disability just means providing this one thing. It needs to be a very consultative process, even when it's a physical disability. Let's say you need to build an accessible desk. Don't just go and have a carpenter build any type of desk. You need to be consultative. Maybe the measurements, the measurements that another person uses is not the measurement that the other person would use. And then also think about tax relief. And we know that persons with disability, in terms of taxation, the government does not tax any amount between 0 to 150. Of course, when you bring on board a new talent, you also want to retain that particular employee. You'd want them to grow within the ranks within the organization. So how would you work around the culture of the organization? Are the staff trained around disability etiquette? Do they know how to interact with this individual, respect their rights? In terms of availing reasonable accommodation needs, can this go on so that the person has that support to be able to deliver in their job? Because actually most of the persons with disability would leave a company, especially there's no provision of reasonable accommodation. And then also avail learning and growth opportunity as you would to any individual. Whether they are training, symposium, promotion, there are perhaps stories you'd hear that you individual X, because they have a disability, a physical disability, they never get to go to the field, they never get opportunity, let's say, to engage in the different activities that the company has. Now, I know I've tried to rush because of time. There's some questions I asked at the beginning. What are the challenges to disability inclusion in the context of your company? Because it's only when we interrogate what is currently happening, how the current processes are, we would be able now to think of the necessary modification and adjustment that needs to be done so that we can improve and become inclusive. And what do we need to do differently to improve the inclusion of persons with disability? But at this moment, I would want maybe to receive some questions, have some people respond to the questions we are asking, so that we can move on. Irene, I don't know whether there are any questions you can see, but let me just put my email address on the chat box. Thanks, Agnes. Anyone who would want to?
Thank you, Regina. We appreciate. Hello, Regina, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
We thank you for your input. I don't know whether you are able to see the Q&A.
Okay, let me.
I think we have one question from Susan who says, kindly post the PWD advertising link here so we can access it, the FUZU one. And I think someone had also said they have had a challenge with when people apply through FUZU and they do not attach the required documentation. Maybe you can address that as we see whether we have more questions.
Oh, thank you. Now, I'll put the link to that career platform in the chat box. So in terms of the challenge with accessing the platform, the attachment with the document, what I can do is speak to the people who I know manage that particular platform. There are people from the National Council we can reach out to, and even FUZU, and get to see what could be the challenge. So because currently I don't want them, might not give a direct answer, but I'll reach out to them, and then Irene, I'm going to give you feedback. Yeah.
Yes, that's okay. Yes. Then we can share.
Yeah. Yes, let me look through the Q&A. I'm seeing there's someone asking who is a person with disability, PWD, which disease. So a person with disability is a person who has the impairment that I talked about. And we have different categories. We have hearing, we have visual, we have physical, we have intellectual disabilities. Yeah.
All right, Gina, sorry, I can add just a bit. Yes. And very sorry for joining at this point in time. My internet has been a challenge. Just to add that, and you must probably have said this, that a person, the CRPD, which you mentioned, talks of a person with disability being a person long-term physical, mental, intellectual impairment, where when this interacts with a barrier, makes this person not able to perform on an equal basis with others. That is who the person with disability is, with all faculties just like any other person, but experiencing barriers in the physical environment. And there's a question, Regina, which someone asked on whether to disclose whether you're a person with disability or not at the beginning. Maybe you can take that while I also chip in. Thank you, Regina.
Thanks, Eric, for all that contribution. I'm looking at that question for how someone should disclose. Or come again with that question. What? Go ahead, Eric, with that question around disclosing.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I was just going to contribute to the question someone asked about whether you disclose or not disclose. So we look at it in two ways, because one is the person may disclose it and feel, because of the stigma and discrimination that has been there all around, feel that this person will not qualify. And it's true, person with disabilities have experienced this. So I cannot give like a straight disclose or not disclose, but it takes two to tangle. As also IHRM and membership, what you can do is be proactive and reach out, tell members to disclose, because these are the benefits, these are the support that they'll get along the way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Yeah, the question to disclose or not depends with the organization and the culture of the organization. Because if you disclose, there are some you'd think it would work against you, and if it's something that is not apparent, they think then there's no need. There are actually people who have worked for organization for ages without ever disclosing, and then later on, when the company starts, to be considerate and inclusive, they now come out. Grace Jenga asked, can bipolar
Sorry,
issues
Regina,
be classed?
just a quick one there. That one way of being proactive is actually just when you are putting on online, just have forms that say, are you a person with disability, so that people feel welcome, appreciated, and actually belonging. Thank you, Regina.
True. Yes, it's always about that sense of belonging. Grace Jenga asked, can bipolar issues be classified as disability? Bipolar qualifies as a psychosocial disability. So bipolar, depression, and all those. But for us here, we don't focus mostly on what is even the medical diagnosis. It's about removing the barriers. For example, someone with bipolar, what are the reasonable inclusion needs that the person will have? Perhaps they might not want to be in a stressful work environment, because that's not good for them. But it's upon the person to say, not to assume that if someone has bipolar, they cannot work here because they'll get angry quickly. It's about challenging those assumptions. Then Edna Indimuli is asking, is there a checklist that an organization can use for internal assessments without involving a third party? So I know there's one assessment that we normally encourage employers to do. It's from the International Labour Organization. It's a self-assessment that a company can do, and just to be able to see where they are at in terms of inclusion. So Edna Indimuli, kindly just take my email address from the chat box, and I'll post it again, and just write to me, and we will be able to share that ILO self-assessment, and the company would be able to do that. You'll be able to do that for your organization. Bernard Njora, mental psychosocial disability inclusion strategies and policies. Bernard, you can get in touch with us, just like the way for someone with physical disability would have, let's say, inclusion around the environment, the physical barriers. Even for psychosocial disability, there are inclusion strategies that an organization can use to ensure that they build an environment that is safe and comfortable for them. I have a staff with disability. So this is Janet Otwabe asking, I have a staff with disability and it's taking long for her to be registered with the National Council. Can you assist based in Kisii? What the individual, you can encourage the individual to do is to visit the NCPWD offices in Kisii County. But I know currently the NCPWD has rolled out a new registration system. I think yesterday I was in a meeting with them where they mentioned there's a challenge, but the system is being improved on. But if you could just encourage them to go to the NCPWD Kisumu office and see where the process could be stuck at. There's Regina Mwangi, I have a namesake here. Thank you for that presentation. My question is, must the person living with disability be registered? It's good to be registered. Answering to my namesake, it's good to be registered. One, it helps the National Council and even the national government in terms of planning, policy planning and budgeting and all that. And again, there are benefits to you to be registered, like the way the person on top there is asking, why is their registration taking long? So if you're registered with the National Council, especially if you're an employee with disability, you would be able even to apply for benefits like the tax exemption, applying for assistive technology, applying for trade tools. I know the council also provides a fund for people who want to start businesses and such like. So it's very good to be registered. Again, you have to be counted. If you're not counted, you don't really matter. So
what is not counted does not matter.
Yeah, what is not counted, it doesn't matter.
I just want to add also, Regina, that that person who is not identifying as a person with disability or is not registered as person with disability, then that limits the advocacy that can be carried out here to empower and improve the welfare of persons with disability. Because really, how else can you be known to be out there? Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you, Eric. Esther Tino, is asking any contribution from the government to students with disability. I know currently the National Council is offering some scholarships, I think in every county for students with disability. Then Jack Tolina, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. You're asking, when does a condition qualify as a disability? Eric has given us the definition, long term. Eric, would you want to speak on that?
Yes, let me just speak on that. And yeah, any condition can be qualified as a disability. And we say it's a changing space or environment to recognize what is disability. Some place they recognize HIV as a disability. Other place they recognize cancer as a disability. However, as Regina said, as we ourselves here, we cannot exactly tell you whether you're a person with disability or not, because there's a process to that. There's a medical process, there's a social related process, and only the National Council for Persons with Disability in this country can through all that process, give you a card which qualifies you as a person with disability. Unfortunately, unless you go through that process, that's when you can be recognized legally that you're a person with disability. Back to you, Regina.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Thanks for elaborating on that. I was on the Q&A. I'm now in the chat box, just to see what are the reactions coming in. Regina, I'm seeing have so many namesakes around here. There's a question. Thank you for the session. Why PWD? Why not PWI, person with impairment? Eric, would you want to take that?
Definitely. Now, Regina must have touched it, that persons with disabilities, they experience disability simply because of the barriers that they experience in the environment. So the connotation disability, as long as there are barriers, it will always be there. So if, for example, we were to have no barriers, then we are fine being referred to as persons with impairments. And so as long as there are barriers in the environment, there will always be persons with disability, because really what's hindering them from performing just like any other person, they are the barriers. And Regina, I must emphasize what you say, that when you have an impairment, then you experience a barrier, then you are a person with disability. That's equal to disability. And when you have an impairment and you experience your accessibility, then that's equal inclusion. Back to you, Regina.
Thanks, Eric. There is someone here. Agnes Njeru. Are there any implications for companies and government organizations who have websites and applications that are not accessible to people with disability? Yes, there are implications, and a quick one I'm seeing is that the organization or the company will stay exclusive will still continue to not include persons with disability. But looking at it, there are legal implications. But even now, without speaking about the legal implications, I think when we talk about disability inclusion, looking at the human rights to do, being inclusive, it is the right thing to do for any business, for any organization, for any society to be inclusive. So you will be locking out a whole population that I talked about, 15%. And so you will be denying yourself the opportunity to get that talent that someone is able to do it very well and would be able to contribute highly in your organization. Eric, you want to add something?
Yeah. Just thank you, Regina. I just wanted to add to what Regina said. One, yes, we are not very litigants, or the terminology there. We are not a very litigating nation as per now. So you may continue to exist and no one will sue you at the moment for inaccessible website. However, the new bill, Persons with Disability Bill 2022, which may be passed soon, will actually obligate you to make that website accessible to persons with disability. And this will be enforced by the National Council of Persons with Disability. And just to add that, really, if you're not accessible, then you're missing out, one, on the talent, and two, as a profit-making organization, you are definitely missing out on a business opportunity.
Yes, exactly. Thanks, Eric. Susan Campbell says, at IHRM, thank you for putting this together. Very informative. Keep it up. You've set a high standard for 2023. Exactly. Elizabeth Okumu, will the recording be shared? Having internet issues and have been on and off. Yes, I'm sure Irene will share the recording. Asha Dima says, Regina and all the organizers, the session was informative. Mary Bostier says, I think we need more of this. We would be delighted to deliver the sessions again and again. Marilyn Buthe is asking how to disclose and where. Eric, would you want to take that?
Oh, yes. So that, I suppose, is in reference to the whole landscape of maybe applying for a job, being in the system, and even maybe at the point of exiting the system. So as I said, there are two-pronged approach to this. A proactive organization will endeavor to have persons with disability in their organization disclose, simply because there may be opportunities to that, and also taking care of the persons with disability. As a people with disability, the onus is on us to disclose. However, what has been there before, the stigma and the prejudices that have been there and discrimination sometimes make people with disability not disclose. The call at this point in time is basically for persons with disability to disclose. Organizations also, we see them calling out persons with disability, telling them they are encouraged to apply, there are forms to fill in, and this and their data is protected, and so on and so forth. So two-pronged approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Let me see whether we have any more questions before we bring this to a close.
Maybe, Regina, as you scroll through, I see we're running out of time. Just to confirm that, yes, we will share the recording, but it's also available on YouTube, IHRM Kenya. We record and share all our learning sessions there. So you can also review it and just check something that you may have missed. And also, maybe, I don't know whether, Regina, you shared this, but Sightsavers and IHRM are looking at a long-term engagement. And I've seen a lot of questions around policy and guidelines and material that one can reference as they come up with internal documents to guide them on diversity and inclusion. We will be sharing some of this information because Sightsavers has developed a number of guidelines, a checklist that you can just look at. So once we firm that up, we will be sharing with members as well. Something else, I think for now, that's it. Maybe Regina, you could take the last one so that we can bring this to a close, and to thank members for staying on. And I can see from the chat, you have enjoyed the session and you have learned a lot. So thank you, Eric and Regina as well. You could take the last one, then we can close. Asante.
Yeah, thank you so much, Irene. I think those were all the questions. There's someone who asked whether they could reach us directly could reach out to Sightsavers directly. I think you can, and just keep IHRM on the loop as well, because as Irene has mentioned, we are going to enter into a partnership and we would be able to support all of you towards becoming inclusive. I'm so happy to see that you have enjoyed the session. Let me quickly just mention the few steps that you could take even today from right now towards becoming inclusive. There's someone who has asked whether there is a law for all companies to have accessible environments. CHRP, when she started, Kuresha mentioned about the legal requirement, the 5% that is mentioned even in the Constitution. So when it says that 5% of your workforce should be inclusive, that is heavy in itself, because for you to be inclusive, you need to be inclusive all round. It's not just a matter of ticking a box and say we have this and this person, because inclusion is a journey I've mentioned. There are so many barriers that we need to remove. Let me look at these slides before we bring it to a close in the next 30 seconds. Something you could have is have open days, for persons with disability to come in and tour your company and see what are the opportunities there. Career fairs, mentorship programs. I did mention we work with job seekers with disability, and your company could actually, let's have our staff volunteer to mentor job seekers with disability and be able to share with them, employment readiness skills. In terms of your programs, you could offer scholarships to persons with disability, marking the International Day of Persons with Disability. Having accessibility audit report, if you conduct accessibility assessment, have a learning exchange with other organizations like organizations of persons with disability, providing internships to persons with disability, paid internship, training for persons with disability, job shadowing, reviewing your HR and even all your policies, and really making them inclusive of all persons. Then training your staff on disability inclusion, and identify a disability inclusion champion in your organization. There's always that one person who is very passionate about inclusion issues. Can that person be made an inclusion champion? Thank you so much, Irene, and everyone else for this invite, for sitting through the 1 hour, 30 minutes for this training. I know we've done it very quickly in the interest of time, but thank you so much. You've been a very interactive audience. I've learned so much from you, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much. Back to you, Irene.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Regina and Eric. We truly appreciate the insights that you have shared with us, and to Sightsavers as well. We look forward to our collaboration so that we can promote inclusivity in our places of work and even in our society. Just a quick one for members. Tomorrow we have another webinar. Now learning has kicked off on a serious note. So we have another free webinar for members. We have a lot of questions around the NSSF Act. So please join us tomorrow. The flyer is out. If you haven't received it, please check our platforms. Tomorrow from 11:30 again to 1 p.m. we will have Zamara taking us through the NSSF Act and the implications for employees as well as employers, and you do not want to miss that. And we thank you for registering through the portal. We are able to maintain the records of those who have attended, and you have earned yourself 1 CPD point. So we thank you for plugging in, and please feel free to get in touch with us if you're having any challenges. We have a new portal. If you have not accessed it, please access the portal and update your records. You can pay and download your membership certificate online. You do not need to come to the offices, and we're happy to support you do that. Our CPD calendar is also available online for the various programs that we're running this year. So thank you so much on behalf of the Executive Director and the team. We thank you, Eric and Regina, and we wish you all a wonderful afternoon. Asante.
Asante.
Thank you very
Bye,
much.
everyone.
Bye.